Hello, everyone. We will just let everybody join before we get started. We're just waiting for more people to join before we get started. Numbers are still going up, so we're still waiting for more people before we start. Okay, I think we'll get started. If people join afterwards, we've got a recording. Just so you know, this will be recorded and it is going to go onto our YouTube channel, so you can watch it afterwards if there's anything that you wanted to look over. So, my name is Lindsay, and I'm the Outreach Manager here at Homerton College. And you're also joined by Paul, our Sciences Admissions Tutor, and Sandy, whose name is on here as oh, whose name is on here as Alexander. Um, our Arts Admissions Tutor. Sorry, I just got distracted by Paul telling me that I have misspelt something. Is that? Yeah, that's fine. There is a spelling mistake on the first slide, but it's all good. The rest of it should be fine. So you're also joined here by Alexander or Sandy, who is our Arts and Humanities Admissions Tutor. I'm
Hello,
going to
can you hear me all
start this
right?
session all about acing Oxbridge written assessments and interviews. The first thing would be not to make a spelling mistake like that in the first line. But I'm going to tell you a bit more about how to do that quite generally, giving you lots of tips on assessments and interviews. And then after that, we will do some mock interview questions with Sandy and Paul. So you'll get to see some mock interview questions in both the sciences and the arts. And at the end, we'll be joined by two current Homerton students. So you'll be able to ask any questions you want to all of us here. You can
Sorry,
also put,
Lindsay.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good. I was just checking you could hear me. I thought my mic might have
Yes,
broken.
we can
Sorry.
hear you.
Carry on, didn't mean to break his mic.
Um, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat or the Q&A throughout and we'll get around to them. So, we're just going to start by saying that the application process to Oxford or Cambridge is really holistic. We don't just look at one thing. Obviously, this session is focusing on assessments and interviews, but we do look at lots of different things. So we look at your personal statement, and we have another session which touched on this. We look at all of your achieved qualifications and the grades that you've obtained. We look at the reference from your school. We look at any contextual information that we're able to get. We also will obviously look at these assessments that we're going to talk about, your interviews, how you've performed in those, and there's usually multiple, so it's not all on one. And we might also ask for some written work that you've done in school, in which case we will also look at that. And we always say that every part of the process is as important, so it's not worth being uh, really heavily scared about one particular aspect because actually we look at everything. What do we look for in applicants? This is just a reminder. There's four main things that we look for. First one is pretty obvious, academic ability and potential. So we want you to have obtained really strong grades in your previous qualifications. Typically, three A levels if you're taking A levels, but if you're taking other qualifications, so for Scotland, typically be three advanced hires. Um, and we can also, if you're taking another qualification, if you do ask in the chat, we can give you the expected grades for those. But typically, if you're taking A levels, it would be two A stars and an A for sciences, one A star and two A's for arts and humanities. We also want to see a strong teacher reference, which will tell us all about your potential, how well you're doing, how you compare to other people in your school. Next, we want to see genuine motivation and passion for your subject. We want you to make sure that you've chosen a subject that you're really interested in, not just because your teachers or your parents have told you to study that subject, but because you genuinely want to learn more about that subject. And that will be really clear for us to see throughout the process. Um, Also, it's really in your interest as well to have that passion for your subject, to choose a subject that you want, because you're the one who's going to be studying there for 3 or more years, a subject that you have chosen. Third, we want to see an ability to think independently and critically, and that's really heavily something that we assess in our assessments and our interviews. And we'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. But essentially, we want to see that you can think outside of the box, that you can use knowledge that you have to try and work out some things that you might never have thought about before. And for some subjects, we look at a vocational commitment, and that's for subjects which we call more vocational, such as medicine or veterinary medicine, where you're not just committing to a few years for that subject, you're ideally committing to doing that as a career as well. And in that case, we want to see that you're really committed to doing that, and typically that is shown through work experience. Moving on to assessments. So there's two types of assessments that you might be asked to take. The first one is pre-registration required assessments. There are some subjects which have assessments that you have to take at an assessment centre that you have to have registered for beforehand, and that you would have to take regardless of the college you're applying to. And those ones are those pre-registered ones. I'll show you which subjects have those in a second and which assessments they are. The second type are college assessments. So these are subjects are specific to the college that you have chosen or that you've been allocated. And that means that you might not get that assessment depending on which college your application has gone to. And they will be specific, and you can find online usually which colleges will have an assessment for a particular subject. This might be in addition to the pre-registration required assessment, but typically it is instead. So it's for subjects that don't have that pre-registration required assessment. Why do we have assessments when a lot of other universities don't? For a few reasons. The first one is to assess the aptitude and the potential of candidates. So we want to see how you think. Second one is to provide a common set of data with which to compare applicants to a specific course, pretty similar to the first one, but essentially we get huge amounts of really highly qualified applicants, and we need a way to distinguish between them and to see, to assess your potential further. And finally, we want to stretch and challenge you, again, for the same reasons, to make sure that you are really prepared for somewhere like Cambridge. What would the content be like? If you have specific questions, we can answer those, but quite generally, the content for STEM assessments is typically going to be multiple choice with problems to solve. It's often based on A-level or advanced higher content. You're not expected to get it all right. So a lot of people will get into Cambridge when they haven't got everything right. They might, well, Paul will be able to maybe give a more specific percentage. I don't want to give a sort of fake percentage about how much people tend to get right on these tests because it will depend every year on different people's performance. But essentially, if you're managing to do quite a lot of it, but there's lots that you still haven't done, then you're probably still doing really, really well. They're supposed to challenge you. They're supposed to be really difficult. In the arts and humanities, it's often an essay to write and or a multiple choice with a text to read. Typically, it will be things that you haven't really thought about before in school. So you're usually not expected to have prior knowledge of the topic, but it's testing your ability to write an essay, a structured essay, make an argument in a set amount of time, or to analyze a text that you've been given, again, in a set amount of time. Here's some information about the pre-registration required assessments. So we have the ESAT, Engineering and Sciences Admissions Test, and that one is for chemical engineering and biotechnology, for engineering, natural sciences, and veterinary medicine. For that one, the deadline to register is the 29th of September, and the assessment date will be the 9th or 10th of October. If you haven't already registered for these assessments, it is worth looking into it as soon as possible because centres do book up, fill up, so you do want to make sure that you can have a centre that's the nearest as possible to you. Second test is the TMUA, the Test of Mathematics for University Admissions, and that one is for computer science and economics, and the deadline is the same, and the assessment date will be the 13th or 14th of October, just before the Cambridge application date deadline. Next one is the LNAT for law, which has an earlier registration deadline of the 15th of September and a assessment date of the 15th of October. Although you can take it before then, so it's by the 15th. And medicine, the UCAT registration deadline is the 19th of September, and you have to have taken it by the 26th. We can't do anything if you miss those deadlines. We're not in charge of the test centres. So do make sure that you've registered and that you know where you're taking it. You've taken control of all of that. How to prepare for these assessments? Essentially, there's a lot of past papers available online, and we recommend doing those in timed conditions. That's the best way to get a good sense of what you're going to be asked. And that's what we'd recommend. I didn't mention on that last slide as well that you might be asked for maths to take the STEP exam, and that one happens at the end of year 13. Sorry, you will be asked for maths to take the STEP exam. That one happens at the end of year 13. So it's not considered a pre-assessment, but it is an assessment that you will be asked to meet a certain grade in for to get into Cambridge. Fine. The next thing is written work. So you might be asked to submit some work that you've done in school. Your college will let you know whether you need to submit any, how much, and all the details on how to submit that and what we're expecting. Make sure that you're happy with the work that you've submitted because you might be asked to discuss it in your interview. And also keep a copy so that you can reread it beforehand. Typically, it will be as marked by your teachers and a typical piece of work that you've done in school. But every college will ask you for something maybe slightly different. So have a look at, read their emails and check exactly what they want you to submit. Moving on to the main topic of this session, which is interviews. So why do we do them? We want to gain an insight into your thought processes. We want to see whether you fit the Cambridge and Oxford teaching methods. Interviews are a lot like our small group teaching, our supervisions, and putting you in that scenario before getting to Cambridge allows us to see whether you would fit the teaching methods that we have here. We want to understand your particular areas of interest. We want to see how you deal with academic challenges and new information. And we really want to see you as people rather than just a set of data. Every year, the directors of studies and all the interviewers are really excited to meet all the potential, all the applicants. So they really do want to see you and meet you and see all these amazing people who have the same interests as them. Interviews are also a great opportunity for you to build on information that you have provided in your written application, to show an interviewer that you can tackle unfamiliar questions, to demonstrate flexible thinking and a desire to learn new things, to have an academic conversation with an expert in your chosen area of study. That is something that not everybody gets to do. So it's a real privilege to get to be interviewed, and it's quite important to remind yourself of that even if the outcome isn't as you'd like it to be, you have had the opportunity to talk to that expert about the same things, about the same interests that you have. And you get to experience the style of teaching at Cambridge or Oxford and see if it's something that you would enjoy. How the interviews work, essentially, they are an academic conversation based on the subject that you are applying for. I've said already, they're a lot like our supervisions. Typically, you'll be asked to apply knowledge that you already have to new situations to see how you think. And I won't dwell on that because we'll give you some mock interview questions in a second, which will really show you what we mean by that. You might have, typically for sciences, lots of problems to work through. And in the arts, you might get shown material, you might get a text to discuss. You could also get shown some material in the sciences. You will get somewhere between 1 and 3 interviews. At Homerton last year, we gave everyone 2. That wasn't because we wanted to double the workload for ourselves. It's because we really wanted to give you a chance, 2 chances to shine. And the interviews are about 20 to 25 minutes each. It might be that you have one longer interview, but typically you'll get 2 approximately and about 20 to 25 minutes each. You will get 2 interviewers in each interview, and that again is not to trick you. It is because really just for safeguarding reasons and to have one person taking notes while the other one is asking you questions. And the interviews might be online or in person, depending on the college and on the subject. What to expect in your interviews. So there are no trick questions or traps. The interviews are really there to see uh, how you think and to give you that opportunity to show more than what we have on your written application. There's no need to change yourself. Don't worry about what you look like, about your background, about how you speak, about how you approach questions or conversations. Please just be yourself. They do just want to meet you. No need to memorize lots of things to sound intelligent. They really don't want you to have rote learnt anything, and it's really obvious if someone is just reciting something that they've rote learnt. They want you to come in and think about the material that they are showing you. There's no need to know everything about your subject. No one knows everything about their subject. They expect you not to have started to study that degree yet. They expect you to be really interested and maybe to be already studying those subjects in school. But often people haven't studied the subjects that they're about to study in school. So there's definitely no need to know everything. There's not always a right or wrong answer. I'd say that's more in the arts. There is typically a right answer in the sciences, but you don't always need to get to the right answer because we really want to see the process of how you get to that answer. So in a nutshell, we just want to see how you think. How might you prepare for your interviews? 2 things that you can do. We would highly recommend that you engage in supercurricular activities relating to your subject. What that means is that you read anything that you can about your subject, whether that is books, journal articles, listen to relevant TED Talks, watch podcasts, just be aware of the news in your subject, and don't just read it, but actually think about it and form an opinion on what you've read. That is more for the arts and humanities, but it's still relevant in the sciences to actually reflect on the things that you're reading. Um, we have a really handy section of our website that we've just updated, our resources section, so you can have a look at that and find lots of material to prepare for your interviews for every subject. And the second way to prepare is to talk out loud to yourself or to others if you can about anything to do with your subject. Basically, practice feeling comfortable in that atmosphere of having to talk out loud about your subject, which is not very natural for a lot of people. It's not something that you've often done before. So practice talking out loud. It could be that you just open a textbook and talk about a random fact. It could be that you pick something on your personal statement and practice talking about that thing. Um, just that practice of being comfortable speaking out loud will really help you in your interview. That's everything from me about general advice on assessments and interviews. Before we move on to our mock interviews, I don't know whether Paul or Sandy you wanted to add anything to what I've said.
A huge amount of information covered there, and everything you said was correct. I would just add that for some of the pre-admissions assessments, so for many of the sciences, if you want to see what's on them, you can look up the specifications, and it's a document you'll find online under the Pearson website that summarizes all of the things that you need to know as part of that assessment. Now, of course, the assessments may push you in your understanding of those. So you may need to apply some of that knowledge in all sorts of different ways. But that would be a good starting point to find out exactly what you need to know. And the specification is basically a lot of shared content, a lot across different types of qualification, some of which is actually in GCSE, but an amount of which is kind of early A level or equivalent. So look at that. Also, a few people have asked about past papers for the assessments. The ESAT changed last year in terms of its format, but many of the past questions from the 6 or 7 years before that are all appropriate to look at as well. So they're the basic same types of question. And what Lindsay said about the interviews is correct as well. We're looking at how you think. So as well as the admissions assessments, we get quite different information from the interviews because we get to give you hints and help, and we can look at how you assimilate that new information as we go through. So those are my kind of additional points. Sandy, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I mean, a couple for me. I think thinking about the assessments, really think about the tactics of the test. Look up
Mm.
those papers and look at what it's asking you to do. The NSAA, sorry, the ESAT, is asking you for very different things to the BMAT or the LMAT.
Mm.
And learn the tactics of the paper. For example, there are no negative marks on these assessments. It's not like the UK Maths Challenge, so don't be afraid. Make sure you answer every question. Budget the time to do so. Guess if you need to. Even better, give yourself a little bit of time to eliminate a couple of answers because these are typically multiple choice questions in a lot of these assessments. You can get rid of a couple of ones that are pretty definitely wrong quickly. Your guess turns from maybe like a 1 in 4 chance to a 1 in 2 chance of getting things right. Where there's an
Or
essay, make sure you've got ample time to, bring everything together, structure it carefully, give yourself the right amount of time to approach each part of the assessment. Sorry, Paul, you were saying about multiple choice.
yeah, I was going to say it would be nice if they were 1 in 4, but I think a lot of them are
Hmm.
1 in 6 or 1 in 8.
Yeah.
So,
For the sake of example, though,
yeah.
learn the tactics of the test. Make sure you do at least one time practice so that you really get that there. The BMAT, for example, you've got to be answering thick and fast. If you spend 5 minutes answering one question, I guarantee you, you are way behind and you're going to really struggle. So know when to move on as part of the tactics as well. We're not looking for people to get everything right. People often ask, what is a good score in an assessment? And then we cannot give you a number for that. There is no target number to be aiming for. What we're looking for is a strong score compared to the gathered field of applicants applying for that same subject in that same year. But we also look at things contextually as well. So, there are a lot of moving parts underneath in here. The answer really is do as well as you can. Put as much effort as you can into doing well in these assessments. Get as high a mark as you can, and that will stand you in the best stead for your application. Don't spend your energy wondering about trying to game the system and trying to get exactly X number of marks because that should be enough. Just do your very best. Start preparing now, get as high a mark as possible, and that is going to stand you the best chance of doing well in that assessment. Remember, if you're applying for Cambridge, you probably do well in assessments. So learn the test, learn the tactics of it, do everything that Paul and Lindsay have been saying in order to apply and get ready for those. I'll talk more about interviews when we get into the interview questions, I think, but I think all those are very key for the assessments.
And I can't reiterate enough. So practice doing them blind. It's really difficult to do this, but go in, do it under time conditions, and that will give you an idea of how fast you need to answer questions. Then go back and look at what you got wrong. Try and work out where you went wrong. Someone was asking about guidelines for each question. I think actually learning where you went wrong is really important. The process of working out how you went wrong. And you may not get a very good mark the first time, but if you go back and reflect on where you went wrong, you will improve in the future runs. So do it blind. As difficult as it may seem, even if you think you might get a bad mark, go in and do it as a practice blind. Okay.
Yeah.
So should we move on to mock interviews?
Yes.
Okay. Now, for this, it's a slightly different to normal situation
Sorry.
because oh, sorry, Lindsay.
Did
Yeah.
you want me to change the slide, or you want to do a bit of an
Uh,
intro?
I'll do a quick intro and then we can have
Okay,
a look at
go
some
ahead.
pictures. So remember that so you'll be interviewed by four people normally, and each of them will have maybe about 10 minutes. Now, in this scenario, I can't give you individualized feedback and hints, but I can tell you what people normally say and what kind of hints I would give. And so it shows you the process by which we go through these questions. So let's have a look at the first one, which is quite an old question that was asked in engineering, and I've seen it asked for medicine as well. It's one of my favorite questions ever because it's quite simple, it's quite quick for you to access, but it does have hidden depths. So the question is, how many squares are on a chessboard? So if anyone would like to put any answers into the chat, they can. It's my favorite question. I've built an entire set of escape room puzzles around this, believe it or not. Um, anyone want to have a go?
Are there any pieces on the chessboard, Paul, or are we talking about just the board itself? I'm being awkward
Just the board itself. That's a good
here.
question. So everyone started out, a few people started out by saying 64. Now, that is a good answer. Now, it's not the correct answer as such, but what I would say is it's the number of one by one squares. So if you said that, I would say, okay, good. It's the number of one by one squares. Now, at that point, you must be thinking, oh no, that means that I've got to think about others. So the next step is to calculate the number of another type of square. Now, this is actually the bit that people find the most difficult, calculating the number of different types of square. Now, logically, it makes sense to go for the two by twos next, but you don't have to. A lot of people go for the big one around the outside, but that can complicate the process. So I would sort of give you some hints and say, think about different types of square. Now, the next step, trying to find out the number of two by two squares, is, perhaps the most difficult part of the question. How many two by two squares do you think there are? Some people are getting the right answers, so good. I can see that. How many two by two squares do you think there are? And so the correct answer is actually 49. Now, you could calculate that by thinking about the middle of each two by two square, or maybe the top left-hand side of each two by two square, and then counting along just in exactly the same way as you did before. And that will give you 7 along the top and 7 down the side, which is 49. Then you start to see a pattern. So I'd ask, can you see any patterns? And of course, now at this point, you might be thinking, okay, it's 8 squared plus 7 squared plus 6 squared plus 2 squared plus so on and so forth. And you would add up all of these squares. And I might ask you to sort of, write them out in a kind of equation. So when you do that, you actually get to the answer of 204. But the final calculation is perhaps the least important part for me. It's the process by which you get to that point. Now, I use that. It's quite a simple example, but I've seen all sorts of very different questions that take this approach. I saw a good one in computer science where it was about frogs hopping across lily pads across a pond and the number of leaps that they might need. And actually, what it required was for you to try and work out a kind of algorithm to try and work out how you would calculate the number of hops. In mathematics, in particular, they have lots of kind of puzzles like this, maybe a bit more technical than this, but lots of puzzles about how you can calculate the number of balls in different positions on a pool table, or distances thrown in, like the volumes of strange objects, by trying to find patterns that you can pull out the from the information you're given. So that's one type of question where we're asking you to sort of basically try and develop strategies to approach the question which are systematic and get you to an answer. And there may be lots of routes you go down which are not correct, but we'll give you pointers along the way. So another type of question that we commonly use in the sciences is in the next diagram, where we might give you something like a graph to try and analyze. Now, this is a graph I used for psychology interviews and for science interviews about 3 years ago. And the first thing I would do is ask you what it shows. So I'm interested to see what you can pull out of the information. So if anyone wants to put anything in the chat to say what they think it shows, they're more than welcome to. But it's obviously a slightly strange looking graph that contains lots of animals on it. Just out of interest, I might ask you what types of animals they were. Not everyone knows that they're all mammals, but it shows me that you've got some good background knowledge. But the key thing that I'm asking you to try and someone's put a very interesting answer in the chat. So someone has so basically what you would first do is try and just tell me what it shows. So clearly it's showing a relationship between the body weight and the brain weight of different types of organism. And you have the kind of line of best fit going through the middle, which shows you the kind of typical brain to body weight ratio of many animals. And I'd ask you what you think maybe it meant if an animal was above that line. Now, a lot of people leap immediately to sort of talk about things like intelligence, but that's quite a very vague topic. But what you can certainly say is that the animal is committing more of its energy into making a brain than other organisms. And that might correlate with various measures of intelligence. Now, in the sciences, you'll often be asked to interpret numerically a graph as well. And so for this one, I asked people to try and calculate the brain to body weight ratio of the rhesus monkey. And if you just take a pause and have a look at that, see if you can think of any how you would do that. Now, I was a little bit naughty when I made this graph because I removed some data from the axes that might enable you to answer it very quickly. But what you can see is the axes are slightly odd in terms of they go from 0.0001 to 1 to 10,000. And not everyone has necessarily done logs, but I would be interested to see if you could interpret that axis and what that kind of means. And it's an axis where it goes up in multiples of 10. So then I might ask, okay, so what would the rhesus monkey be in terms of body weight? If you think about it, it would, if everything's going up in multiples of 10, the line between 1 and 10,000 would be 100. And equidistant between 1 and 100, you'd have a value of 10. So the rhesus monkey has a body weight of about 10 kilograms. The same thing applies on the other axis, on the y-axis, and the value there will be about 100. Now, something that students always get confused at as well is the units as well. And you may have spotted that actually the units are different on the axes. And so there's a little bit of an adjustment there that needs to be made. So we're talking about a brain weight of 100 grams versus a body weight of 10,000 grams. Now, that kind of calculation is quite common in many of the science questions. We often ask you to manipulate data. Now, in subjects like physics, obviously the equations will be more complex. We might give you an equation to solve, to think about, or to apply, but there'll often be some kind of numerical application to a particular problem. So that's another type of question. Now, the next one, we might also give you, if you can click to the next slide, Lindsay. We might also give you an image of some kind. So this is a question from 4 years ago, where I was asking about the relationships between different types of organism. Actually, if we could go back one slide quickly, I forgot to mention something. The last question on this one was, what do you think the animal in red could be? And so what I'm asking you to do here is try and think about an animal which might commit a lot of its energy to making a brain, which has a body weight of just under a kilogram. And I would tell you that it's not a mammal. And we'd have a discussion then about what you think it could be. And in this case, it is a bird, as someone mentioned. It's actually a crow, something that have been extensively studied at Cambridge for their amazing feats of memory and intelligence. And we would then go on to discuss kind of experiments about how you might measure or quantify the concept of intelligence in different animals. And we might do some experimental design as part of that. So moving on, back to the other slide. Sorry for flipping backwards and forwards. So I was saying that we might give you a graph to analyze. Okay, so and in this graph, we have an evolutionary tree with different organisms on. And I would ask you to interpret what it meant and to talk about it. So have a look at it. And I would also tell you that actually there was a mistake in this. I don't know if anyone can see what the mistake might be. It's a purposeful mistake. What do you think the mistake is? It's an interesting one. This actually is quite a nice assessment of how people can visualize different relationships in their mind and move those relationships around. Can anyone spot what the odd, what the mistake is in this? Good. The fly and the mushroom. Absolutely. So the fly is actually in the wrong place. The fly, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the fly should be coming off of the tree um, between the divergence point when humans and bats branch off and between that and when the mushroom branches off. Because a fly is more related to humans and bats and crocodiles and birds than it is to the mushroom. Believe it or not, actually, in early genetics, this relationship between mushrooms and flies came out from evolutionary analysis. And we might discuss why that mistake could be made based on genetics. And it's all to do with the speeds at which things evolve and how that affects relationships that you see in an evolutionary tree. It's a fascinating field where mistakes were made in science that led to some really weird kind of conclusions. But when people looked at the data in a more systematic way, they realized that there were systematic errors in how things were classified. So we might discuss some of the shared features that they have. What I would also ask is it correct to put the human and the bat seemingly lower in the evolutionary tree than the crocodile and the bird? And of course it is. This tree is, it's good to think of it as a kind of an upside down mobile, you know, those things that you hang off ceilings when you're a child that sort of move around. If you think of it like that, all of these different positions can be rotated and you still have the same evolutionary tree. And so we talk about all these, you know, these relationships. Now, don't worry if you don't know what these organisms are. We would give you the information in the interview to give you the chance to pull that information out. And as Lindsay said, what I'm looking for is how you use the information that we give you, how you synthesize information, so bring it together, how you evaluate that information, and how you build an answer. And sometimes in interviews, this is a good thing to remember. Sometimes we come back to some of the things we discussed earlier on, and we might ask you to bring together the different things that you've effectively learnt during the interview to come to a final conclusion. So if you can, try and, you know, remember what you're saying because it may be useful later on in the interview. One final question is if we go to the next slide, and this is now in my field, so we're talking about animals and plants. I'm a biologist. So this is a group of snails. So once again, we can give you a picture. Sometimes, actually, I've given people the when we used to do it in person, I gave people the objects, but we can't do that if we're doing it online. But it's the same principle. We give you something to start conversation. And my question here is, first of all, do you think that all of these organisms are the same species? Now, that prompts a discussion about what a species is, and you may have learnt the biological definition of a species. But actually, that's not the only definition. Actually, a really good question I ask is, how would you tell if they were the same species? And can anyone think of that? How would you tell if these organisms were the same species? You could test their DNA. It's quite an interesting question because I think almost everyone learns something about this, but it's just applying it in a different way. So you probably learnt about the biological species concept, which means that organisms that are different species can't breed with each other to produce fertile offspring. Now, if you haven't, that's fine, but you could discuss how you would test whether they could breed with each other to produce fertile offspring. And we might have a discussion about why the hybrids of different species would be infertile. And there's some fantastic genetic avenues we can go down there. But the key question is, I would say, they are the same species. And the big question is, how then can you have so many different forms of a single species, given what Darwin proposed in his theory of natural selection? This is a really interesting question, and it can go in all sorts of different directions. There's some uh, good answers that are not necessarily correct, but which are absolutely great to tell me that you've been applying what you know. Someone says radiation, exposed to different environments. This is all good. They could be in different environments. That's great. Anything else? Any other potential arguments? And then what I say is it's actually to do with predation. So these are hunted by birds. And birds can learn. They can learn what snails look like. So then I would ask, how could you, how can there be so many different forms? If you think about it, if birds learn, they can learn what the most common snails look like, and they will hunt those more frequently. And that means that the most common forms reduce in number, but the rarest forms have an evolutionary advantage, and they will increase in number. And whenever you have that system, what we call negative frequency dependent selection, basically the rarest forms increase and the most common forms decrease. And that leads to this balanced equilibrium of having lots of different forms. It's a very special type of selection called negative frequency dependent selection. Now, at that point, we might do a bit of genetics about the snail shell color and the banding. I've also got questions on some distributions, which require a bit of maths to understand the frequencies. There's a bit of probability analysis there. But my final question is a good one. Can you think of it? Oh yeah,
Sorry,
so
I don't
this
know
is my
whether you
last bit.
want these ones.
Oh no, I'm gonna miss those ones out, Lindsay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna finish in a second and hand over to Sandy. But my last question is um basically, can you think of any other scenario where you have incredibly stable frequencies of different types of form of organism within the same species? And there's one example that applies almost across the living world where you have different forms, which when they're rare have an advantage and when they're common have a disadvantage, which leads to an incredibly balanced equilibrium. Can anyone think what the answer to that might be? This is my last question, and I'll hand over to you, Sandy. I'll give you a few moments. Think about it. Two different forms in the same species, which are maintained at very, very consistent frequencies by selection, because whenever one is rare, they have an advantage. Whenever one is common, they have a disadvantage. Something that applies across, I mean, it's literally across animals and plants and all sorts of organisms.
Just to say, Paul, there are some answers in the Q&A as well, just in case you weren't checking that.
Oh, I've been looking at the chat.
Most of them are in the chat. Ideally, if you
Yeah.
could put them in the chat, that's
Yeah.
great.
And someone has just got it. Yeah, absolutely. This is the explanation for why in most species there is a 50-50 sex ratio. Now you might say, well, that's because of the XY chromosomes and their segregation. But actually, that system of sex determination has evolved because the 50-50 sex ratio is so evolutionarily stable. If you think about it, if 50-50 is going to be the equilibrium, there will be systems evolved to stop organisms deviating too much from that. And that's why the XY chromosome is so common. But it's interesting to know that even in organisms that don't have our sex determining system, you can still have 50-50, even if it's caused by temperature in reptiles, by proximity in clownfish, or all sorts of other determining systems. Okay. Anyway, so just to summarize, I've taken you through basically 3 or 4 questions really quickly in 20 minutes. In the real thing, you would have a lot longer and I would give you more hints. But hopefully it shows you the type of thinking that we're looking for, where you're applying what you know about biology to new scenarios. Now, what this means is it's going to be quite difficult for you to predict what the interview question will be. Everyone, because I studied an animal called the zebra mussel when I did my doctorate, everyone always thinks that I'm going to ask about zebra mussels. But I've asked questions on viruses, on plants, on animals, on genetics, all sorts of different questions. But every question that I ask, I can guarantee, uh, ask gets people to think about applying what they know to new questions and new scenarios. And this is why we love interviews, because it gives us a chance to chat and to really think in depth about particular topics. And all being well, actually, students actually often enjoy these interviews. They're quite good fun because you actually learn something, you can have a good chat, and hopefully we can, um, you know, really get the best out of you through these questions. So that's me. I've overrun Sandy as usual, so I'm going to
No, that's
pass
fine.
over to you.
I
So
think we
yeah,
overran the other bit, so don't worry.
yeah,
It's all good.
Um,
yeah.
okay, so
So if you
shall
want
I
to hold
move?
my slide for a second, we'll
Shall
come back
I
to that in a moment.
stay
Stick the
on?
snails back up.
I'll
Stick the
stay.
snails back up. They're fun for a
Okay.
moment.
Oh,
Just,
have you got a question, Sandy? Yeah.
yeah. Well, not about this, but
Uh,
thinking about arts and humanities interviews are actually the approach is not that different to the science interviews. Sciences may be focused a little bit more on applying what you do already know to a new situation. We're in the arts and humanities, we're generally going to introduce you to some new situations and some new ideas and see what you can reason through based on these. We're not necessarily expecting a large amount of subject knowledge because it's not really necessary for accessing a lot of our courses. Whereas, for example, in a subject like economics or physics, you really do need to have some mathematical knowledge to be able to access the course and do well on it. So don't be surprised if you're given some new information in an interview, particularly in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, a topic that you haven't really explored, a source or a you know some sort of input that you're not expecting. What we're looking to do is see what you can do with your reasoning skills with something brand new. So we'll often introduce a question or a source by saying we're not expecting you to have any knowledge about this. What we want you to do is see what we can piece together as a team, see how we can increase your understanding. So let's give you an example of this type of question that we might use. This is a sort of question I might use in history or Asian and Middle Eastern studies or history of art or any sort of historical based topic. Lindsay, if you're happy to pop the thing on the screen. Now I might start. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this in the interview. And we may have two or three sort of large topics that we cover within an interview. And I would start off by asking with this, firstly, just tell me what you can see. If you want to get some ideas in the webinar chat for that. Now, if I'm asking something like that, it really is that simple. What I want to do is just start getting your confidence building. You may know nothing about this object. You may have seen nothing like it in your life before, and that's okay. I want you to start by describing what is there, to start getting us warmed up into the question, to start thinking about things together. And what I'm not looking for is any leaps of reasoning to begin with, but just starting on here. So someone's pointed out we can see patterns on this thing. Cool, we can start to work out, okay, well, what sort of patterns are we seeing on there? I might ask, okay, say, I see some patterns. Okay, tell me what you think those are on. Someone saying animalistic or natural imagery, some sort of flowers. We're starting to develop that idea a little bit further. We've got people saying a teapot or a kettle. Good. Yeah. Simple as it sounds. This is not a trick question. Okay. Some sort of genie pottery lamp. Lovely. Okay. Well, now we can start to tell things from it. Someone's saying, oh, I can look for cracks, chips, historical patterns. Okay. Well, there aren't seemingly any chips patterns on here. So what does that tell us about this? What might that tell us about this? Note, I'm not going to give you the answer about what this object is yet, or maybe I won't even at all through the interview, but I want to see how you reason through these ideas. A couple of people have noticed the fish on there. So we've got the natural imagery. Someone here saying, oh, well, maybe it was reserved for special occasions. Maybe that's why it's so well kept and why it's so well preserved. That's a lovely idea. So we might develop that further. Oh, how would, so what sort of person would have owned this object? What sort of status might it have conferred? What might it say about the person who had it? Especially if it was only used for special occasions. Okay. It's worth noting here that this interview, as soon as I bring in the resource, I might show the same resource to every candidate. But in fact, this interview can go in some wildly different directions. And it will change based on the things that people notice and the things that people ask. So some people are focused on the decoration. Wonderful. Some focused on the conditions. Some might focus on the material. We can start to build together a picture of what this object is based on that. And everyone's interview will be a little bit different. But what we're looking to do is dig in deep and start to get you explaining the why. And your reasoning about why you think this is what it is. So we start with the what, getting you picking out some of the elements, but then I want you to start explaining why you think what you do. Why do you think this is something that was important and kept safe through history? Someone's saying maybe it's got special symbolism. Tell me why. Why do you think it's got special symbolism? Give me the reasoning behind your thoughts. We're not necessarily expecting you to get the right answer, but what we want to see is strong reasoning skills where everything makes sense, where you're thinking through this clearly and you're reasoning, putting together your ideas based on the evidence in front of you in a way that you can argue for and back up. It may be you change your mind if we bring in some alternative ideas, and that's okay as long as you can explain why. But we want to see those ideas developing and hopefully get you to a point where you understand this object, this source, better than you did when you started. Okay, someone has suggested it's very shiny, it's got the glaze still on it, suggests a more modern thing. So maybe it's not ancient. It's a really interesting idea. I love that we've got a reason here. Okay. May have been held in a special cellar or a room in the house with someone with wealth. Well, if it's, I might chime in as an interviewer and say, well, if it's, something that's valuable, something that's say for special occasions, would you keep it in the cellar? Is that the place that you would normally keep such an item, or is it more of a showpiece, perhaps? Fine craftsmanship, so noting about the functionality and the design. People making some guesses. Clay might be Bronze era because of the material it's made out of. As we're going through the interview, I'm going to start introducing some more information to start seeing how that affects what you're thinking. So this is, in fact, someone's just said terracotta. This is earthenware. Okay, not quite terracotta, but it is earthenware. What you can notice about the patterns on it is that you've got a fish on the spout and you've got some cherry blossoms on the side. Now, what's really interesting about this, let's make this picture more complicated, is we've got a rather mix of things here because the fish design is rather more Chinese in origin, whereas the Japanese cherry blossoms are obviously from a very different country. So how have we ended up with an object like this, with both Japanese and Chinese imagery being used as part of the decorations? So someone's pointed out, yep, both very East Asian, but they are very different East Asian countries. Could have been designed by someone of mixed ethnicity. Tell me why. Some artists link cultures and art. Yeah. Could be someone from somewhere with Japanese and Chinese influences. Korea. Yeah, there's some good reasoning here. None of this is correct, by the way. But that's okay, because some of these reasons are making sense. Could be someone conflating the two out of ignorance, someone trying to copy designs and put them together. Starting in China, adding the Japanese as well. We've got a whole range of ideas here. In actuality, this is actually a German reproduction from the 19th century of an East Asian style coffee pot incorporating both Chinese and Japanese designs. You can find this in, I believe, the Victoria and Albert Museum. So often quite a status symbol to be having things with an East Asian style at the time, very fashionable within certain parts of society. Again, the key here is I'm not expecting you to know a darn thing about this. But what I'm looking for you to do is to start to reason through these ideas and develop those as we go. And I'm really interested in the why. Why do you think what you do? Give me those reasons. You're going to get prompts, new information. It doesn't mean that you're doing well or that you're doing badly. So we're throwing little extra things in here to get you thinking in different directions and see how that changes the development of what you're thinking. Within an arts and humanities interview, in fact, within any interview, listen carefully to the questions that you're being asked by the interviewer. Being asked questions doesn't mean that you're doing well or badly. It means that we want to see you responding to those like we do in a supervision. How well are you able to pick up on the inputs that the interviewer or the supervisor is giving you and using those in order to develop your learning and develop your understanding? It's about the journey, the thought process, not just the right answer. And that's one of the hardest things if you're a high achieving individual who spent all your time at school worried about getting the marks and getting the right answer. It's one of the hardest things to sort of grasp, the change from school to university. I'm interested in how you think more than I am that you get the right answer. I could give this to somebody, they could come up with a completely wrong answer to this, but their reasoning might be really sound. and that could be a-okay. Let's have a look at a different one. Lindsay, take your pick out of the other two. Which one do you find more interesting? We've got time for one more.
I've just put this one up.
Put this one up. This is a question that I've used before when interviewing in architecture. We can do a very similar thing with this. I would start off by saying, okay, what's interesting about the house at the front here? It's the green one rather than the pink one, although it's one right at the sort of road's edge, not one that's in the background. If you find green and pink a little bit hard to discern between. What I find interesting about this building? You don't need to be an architect to start spotting things about this, believe you me. We've got the upper floor protruding outwards. Yeah, it's definitely part of it. Although you do see that on a number of buildings as well, above porches and things like that. There is a reason why this upper floor protrudes outwards, but we can get into that a little bit later. Windows seem really high. There's some windows facing directly into the back of the greenhouse. So this seems to have been, built blocking some of the windows from the pink house. Interesting. Peculiarly shaped, seems like a very small house. It is indeed a very small house on a very small footprint that has been built blocking the windows of this pink house. So here's a question. Why? Why would anyone build a small, thin house with a bit of an overhang to give them a bit more space? You know, right next to this pink house. Why would anyone build such a thing? Service area could be an odd extension of the back house. Nice idea, but it's not. It's a completely different building. Looks like they were separated. It was built in there. Someone's actually got the right answer here already. Cheap, small amount of land, small things, squatter settlements. Yeah. People could come up with lots of different ideas from here. Well, reasons, and I want to know the reasons why. In actuality, this is something called a spite house. This was literally built out of spite. I love these. They're incredibly interesting. Happens in cases where maybe two people own a particular patch of land. One of them builds the house on most of it, leaves a tiny amount for the other. So they build something purposefully blocking the windows or blocking access just out of spite. In this case, this is a spite house on two fronts. It was built to spite the local council, which is why it's right up against the road, so they had a lot of zoning issues with them, and to spite the person in the pink house. I believe somewhere in Cambridge or near Cambridge, there's actually a house that is built in the middle of a motorway. The motorway actually has to divide and go around somebody's house. That is a spite house as well. We might talk in an architecture interview about, okay, well, what would be the challenges of designing such a house? They're thinking about, I'm less concerned with them knowing what a spite house is. That doesn't matter at all. But actually, what would be the challenges building a house on such a small footprint? Thinking about the use of materials, thinking about the use of space. So we mentioned the overhang earlier on, someone spotted. Well, that gives a little bit of extra space in the top rooms, which they normally wouldn't have in this very thin style of building. Stability of the house, excellent. Yeah, it's going to be very tricky with making sure that if it's thin and high, that it doesn't have trouble with winds, or that the stability of it is going to be really strong. The house is so small just because that was the land that they had left to build on, so we're maximizing the use of it. But maybe someone said, I thought if it were in spite, the person may have built it taller. Or we could ask, well, why not? And think about the structural reasons why building that house taller might actually be a terrible idea. We can talk about, safety and structure. How do you, fit like a kitchen in there? How many people might be actually able to use such a house? We might even talk about the ethics of building a spite house. Is it ethical for an architect to be designing something purely designed to annoy somebody else and restrict their lights and their buildings, etc.? There's 100 ways we could go with this interview question, and I have done before. Expect the unexpected in the arts and humanities. We could bring in literally anything. We can ask you a question on whatever we like, but what we're really focused on is we want to see your thinking skills. We want to see your reasoning, why you think what you do. We want people with an open mind to take in new information, listen carefully to the inputs that are being given by the interviewer. But a critical eye, not just agreeing with something because the interviewer says it, thinking about the reasons for your ideas. It's okay to change your opinion as long as you say why. It's okay to stick with your opinion as long as you say why. But why is the most important question across the entirety of the arts and humanities and in many of the sciences as well. So really focus on explaining that thought process to us, whatever subjects you're doing. We may, bring in a new concept or an idea. It doesn't have to be a visual image. They just work really well in a session like this. We may also ask you questions based on things in your personal statement. But again, we're not necessarily expecting knowledge. We're not testing on, do you remember what the 58th word on page 3 of the book that you read was? What we want to see is just get you started talking about something that is of interest to you and that you've already shown that you've got a little bit of knowledge of. It's just designed to get you going and get you settled into it. Much like the first question about tell me what you see in this picture or in this source is designed to do. Just get the brain fired up and in gear so we can start to get really in depth about your thoughts and your ideas on what we're presenting you with. That brings us up to Q&A time. We've got our amazing student ambassadors here. So I think I shall tie things off there to maximize question time. But I'm happy to answer any more that sort of arise from that.
Thank you very much. So I think I'll stop sharing actually because then we can see more. And I will introduce Nuha and Clara if you want to put your cameras on. Thank you. So we're joined today by two current Homerton students. I'll let you just tell them what subject you're studying and what year you're in. And then we'll start the Q&A. And essentially, you can ask any kind of question, whether it's something more about student life, something about our students' perspective of the interviews, but also anything to Sandy and Paul or me about more logistical about the application process and interviews. Go ahead.
Please, can you make sure that you put the questions into the Q&A as well, folks, so that we can keep track of which ones we have answered and which ones we haven't. Please do not use the chat for questions because we won't look at it and it gets a little bit confusing. There's a button we can use on the Q&A to remove questions from the list that we know we've answered to make sure we don't repeat ourselves. So Q&A for questions, please. I'm so sorry, Clara, Nuha. Just wanted to get that in there before everything a bit chaotic.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, no worries about that. And I guess on to introduction. So hi everyone. First of all, massive well done to you guys for being on this webinar. It is incredibly hot and there's over 150 of you, which shows your dedication, which is already a great sign for applying to Cambridge. My name is Clara and I just finished my second year studying education at Homerton. And education is a 3-year course, so I will be entering my final year in October and happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Hi everyone, I'm Nuha and I'm going into my second year of medicine, medicine being a 6-year course, so it's still a long way to go, but if anyone has any questions specifically about preclinical medicine, because that's what I know a little bit more about, or the application process, then I can answer questions about that.
Thank you so much. So I think the best thing might be that I read out a question and then we can assess who might be the best person to answer that. You might have noticed that Sandy and I have already answered quite a lot of the questions. We've typed a lot of the answers, especially to ones that were really specific, but we'll answer a lot of these out loud as well. Could you discuss how to best prepare for the TMUA and what type of questions an economics applicant can expect to see at interview? Would they be mostly maths based rather than economics? I think that's a Paul question.
Yeah, and my son is just singing in the background. But basically, so the best way to prepare is to do as many sort of practice questions as you can, and be prepared to get them wrong and learn why you got them wrong. So look at the specifications, do the practice questions blind, and then review them. So now it's not really about the number of hours, but the more practice you get, obviously, the more accustomed you'll get to the test structure. Now, this year, because of last year, we changed to a new system. And with the new system, you can actually do some of these tests in kind of real time. There's a great platform that you can use to look at some of these tests called Pearson View, I believe. In terms of the questions we ask, it's a combination of some more purely maths questions and some which are more applied to an economic situation, the kind of puzzle-based questions that I've been talking about. So for most subjects, you should expect a mixture of different types of questions that cover the different areas of the course. So there'll be some more purely mathematical, some more applied to particular problems related to economics, but also to sort of vary, some of the puzzles take economic principles and apply them in a different situation.
Thank you. Just while we have you, Paul, I'll
Yep.
ask you. There's a lot of questions about the ESAT,
Yep.
about how long to spend on each question, and also about when to start revising and how long to spend revising.
Yeah. So you've got a couple of minutes basically on each question. I think it's I want to say 26 questions in an hour, I want to say. And there's three of those sections. So you've got a few minutes. So the great some of the you'll probably find that some of the earlier questions are a bit easier, so you can hopefully do them faster. Some of the questions, some of the others are harder. So it does vary by question, but you know you've just got to keep a track of time to make sure that you answer every question. Remember, there's you can get um so the bet you mustn't run out of time. That's the key thing, because even if if you put an answer to questions, there'll be a probability you'll get some right. But if you don't put any answers, you won't get them right. So I would go through and do the ones you can do, and then go back and if you've got time, look at the tougher ones that you're struggling with. And in terms of hours, it's the same with anything. Practice, practice, practice. It's the same as for revision, of course. That it the more practice you put in, the more familiar you'll be with it. The calmer hopefully you'll be, because you'll be more prepared, and the better you'll do. So the more the better. But we know that you've got other conflicting interests as well. So just make sure, please, please, please make sure you're familiar with the format. That's the most important thing, and do at least a few to make sure that you kept the timing down.
Thank you. We'll move on to a different kind of question. How does the summer and winter pool work? I don't know, Sandy, if you want to take that one.
I'll take this one. Yeah. So
Fun
the
one.
long and short of this is don't worry about these things, because these are processes that happen in the background in admissions. The winter pool is all about basically reallocating applicants between colleges, where we've got a strong applicant that the college they've applied to doesn't have space to take them. A college that has had fewer applicants or fewer strong applicants might be able to pick them up instead. It's a way of making sure that there isn't an advantage to applying to a popular college or an unpopular college in any given year, and means that you don't need to worry about gaming the system in terms of that. It's effectively it's like when you pour like cake mix into a cake tin, and you get those little peaks where you've been pouring stuff in and some bits that are higher than the other, and then you give the cake pan a shake out to even it out. Well, the winter pool is basically us shaking the applicant base out to make sure it's sort of evened out a little bit between the colleges. It's a weird analogy. I'm getting hungry now, but that's the best that I've got in this sort of scenario. The summer pool is a little bit different, and that is basically used for applicants that have missed their offer to see if they've missed by just a small amount, and that another college might have a space for them and might wish to pick them up. Then that's a way of them doing so. So both of these are basically ways of making sure that it doesn't matter which college that you apply to, you've still got a fair shake at getting that place, and making sure that we can reallocate and redistribute to make sure that one college isn't oversubscribed, and that people don't get an advantage or disadvantage off the back of that. All of this happens in the background. You've got basically no agency over this process at all. So don't stress about it. Put all of your energy into the parts of the application that you can make a difference with. The interview, the assessment, personal statement, all these things that you're putting together and preparing for now. If you end up in the winter pool, about 1 in 5 people get pooled to a different college, I think is the overall stat. Might be a little bit less than that, but it's a very common thing, to make sure that we're giving the places across the board and across the university in a fair way. That's the very quick version.
Thank you. So question for Nuha. Were the interviews for medicine really abstract, or did they use knowledge you had to ask about possible complications in a disease you didn't know of?
I'd say that the interviews, like, they don't really rely much on your knowledge. They rely on your ability to work from like foundation, so from your basic like A-level principles. But they're not going to ask you about whether you know a disease or not, because some people might have like researched into that. They will specifically ask you about something that you don't know about, make you a little bit uncomfortable, and see how you can like reason. So just as long as you've got like the basic foundational knowledge, the interview, like none of the questions are going to be too difficult. You'll be able to get to an answer, not necessarily the correct answer, but as long as you can explain your reasoning, then it's not too hard. So I wouldn't say it was too abstract.
Thank you. I think there was a question about education. I'm just trying to vary people who get to answer the questions. So Clara, for education, are there any particular books or supercurriculars that you would recommend that are not on the Cambridge list? What is your favorite part of the course?
Yeah, so in terms of supercurriculars, I think I looked at the list and I was like, oh my gosh, none of this interests me. Should I even apply for this? Tripos. But I did anyways. But because have how the tripos is structured, it's honestly a super broad course, and they love, love, love if you can take a unique perspective on topics and link that to education. And education itself obviously isn't something that's limited to a classroom. It's a lifelong continuous process. So you can honestly go anywhere with the takes and interpretations you want to make. In terms of supercurriculars that I did and would recommend and things I've heard other people do, I'm not sure if you've heard of MOOCs. So that's the letter M, two O's, and then a C. And these are some online training courses that they are self-led. You can spend as long as you'd like on them, and they just show that you've taken initiative to further explore your topic. There are also things like essay competitions, and I really want to emphasize that you do not need to win these things in order for you to put it down on your personal statement. In interviews and in conversations about your previous experiences, the main takeaway that interviewers like to see is that you're teachable and that you are willing to learn more and have that be a continuous process. Another thing I'd recommend are general leadership positions in your school, but really focus on the individual actions you as a person took and what sorts of reflections you had. In terms of books, don't be afraid to say that like reading something changed your perspective or you disagree with what an author wrote. If anything, that shows a higher level thinking style because it shows that you're bringing that unique perspective and interpretation. And like I said earlier, with how the degree is structured, they love unique interpretations. And because of how education is and how it differs across the world, there is no necessary one size fits all model. So you can really go in any direction you'd like. So those are three things I'd recommend that I did and I've heard that other people do as well. I'm trying to think of maybe one more. Books. I
Right.
think general courses as well and programs. But yeah, that was quite a bit. But yes, I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. And I think
Can I jump in
Sandy,
here
yeah.
just to add, don't feel like you have to do something unique or weird. A unique thing can be really interesting if it's well reasoned and well thought through, or it can be really terrible if it's just someone trying to do something unusual for the sake of it. What we're really looking for is that reasoning behind the perspective, whatever it is. But Clara's right, we don't care what that perspective is, as long as it's well argued for. You can agree or disagree with anybody you like. Yeah, in a politics interview, we're not going to give you an advantage or a disadvantage if we agree or disagree with your personal political affiliations. We shouldn't do that. What we want to do is see that you're able to argue for what you're saying really well. And that might be a unique and new perspective, and that can be absolutely wonderful. But even if it's something we've heard 20 times before, but it's still a really well reasoned and well argued version of that, then that's fab as well. Unique is great, just don't think you have to do something madly new to get.
Thank you. There's a few questions about whether there are available online interview questions. I think Oxford have some. I don't know if I should say that.
Oxford
but,
have some.
but
Here's
I
the thing, we
don't
can
know
ask,
if we do.
we don't have any official sort of guide to that, and that's on purpose. We can ask, individual interviewers can ask whatever they like, as long as it's going to be useful and linked to the subject, obviously.
Mm.
I think the key is get yourself thinking about new things and things that you're not necessarily expecting as part of this. Someone's asked to sort of maybe answer two questions at once. Someone says, when do you think you're ready for an interview because they're unpredictable? What's the best way to prepare? And I think the best way to prepare is talking and reasoning through things that you're not familiar with. Get your teacher to give you some problems within the sciences that ask you to apply the knowledge that you have in different ways. Get your history teacher to give you some historical sources from places and time zones that you don't know anything about, to practice reasoning through those. And practice talking. talk through your ideas. We need you to think out loud in an interview. We're looking at how you think, right? But the only way we can get an idea of how you think is by you talking us through that, because we cannot read minds. As amazing as Paul is, he is not a mind reader. He cannot, get inside your head and work that out. So we need you to tell us those things. Talk us through every step of that reasoning process, like you would in a supervision. I'm sure Nuha and Clara will be able to back me up a little bit on this. That's what you do in that teaching when you're in the room with the academics and the other students, is talking through those ideas, making them understand what is in your head so that you can have some discussions and or arguments, depending on how it goes, about those ideas and develop those even further. So practice talking, practice thinking about new things. And someone's asked, when do you know that you're ready? You'll know that you're ready because the interview is happening, and that you've done that good preparation. It's a hard thing to say you're ready. That's just a question of your own self-confidence in your own abilities. But if you're preparing and doing those things, then you are doing everything you can to prepare yourself for what we're going to be throwing at you. And the last thing is that we're not trying to get you with these interviews. Lindsay's mentioned this earlier on. We're there to help you. We're asking questions. It's to help you along, to help you gain that understanding. It's not you versus us. It's you working with us to increase your understanding.
Thank you.
I would just add to Sandy's, everything Sandy said is correct. There's one other thing that you can practice doing. And if any parents are watching now, they'll probably laugh at this, but you need to practice listening. Because one of the key issues we face in interviews is where students just keep on talking and they don't listen to the advice that we're giving. So there does need to be a bit of practice about taking on new information to adjust your arguments as well. So practice that too.
Oh, yeah. And one of the things, listen carefully to the question that you're being asked and answer that question, not what you've prepared in advance and think that you want to talk about. We're trying to get you to think in certain directions or about certain things in here. What Paul said is so vital. Listen and respond to what we're asking, not what you want to talk about or what you've already pre-prepared. I see so many people fall into that trap every single year.
Thank you. Is the IELTS score very important for overseas students? Is it fine if it meets the requirements of 7.5, or should we be getting higher than that?
It's a minimum. So yeah, so if you meet that, we will make the IELTS offer when we offer a place, and we will set it at the minimum level at the moment. So basically, you just need to meet our published requirements. But that's after we've made you an offer, generally.
There's a question about someone who wants, if I want to do a subject like natural sciences, then do medicine, how would that work? Would I be able to convert after I finish my BA? Would I need to do all 6 years, or will I be able to do it in 4?
I think this could be one for Nuha if you want to do this one. I could do it, but I don't know if you want to talk about it.
I don't know much about
Okay.
course conversion. All I do know is that it might, if you are set on doing medicine, it might be a better idea to apply for the medicine course, because in third year we get to intercalate in any other degree, and a lot of people choose to do natural sciences. And the first 3 years does feel very similar to biological natural sciences because it's preclinical. So it would probably be a better idea if you are dead set on medicine to apply for medicine, and then in your third year pick a natural science subject.
Absolutely. So that's a really good point, that you can do both as part of our medicine course. You actually end up with a third year. You can end up with a third year, basically degree in natural sciences. But if you did want to, transfer, we do have a postgraduate medicine degree at Cambridge. It's quite intense because you're catching up on a lot of stuff, but you can basically do that after you've got your first degree. It's quite a competitive course as far as I understand as well.
Thank you. Possibly a question for Sandy. How is the architecture assessment task taken into consideration? Is it marked or graded? And I guess that's
no formal
general.
mark or grading. It's part of the holistic application process that we're looking at. What we're really interested in that assessment is how can you communicate through drawing. It's not about who's got the best technical drawing skill necessarily. We're not necessarily looking for it to be precise super realism. What we want to see is, are you able to communicate your ideas to us through the medium of visual art?
Thank you. What is a good example of written works? What does it look like? What are the components that you're assessing? Again, for Sandy, probably.
So written work is typically only asked for in arts, humanities and social sciences subjects. Don't worry, physicists. the chances of you being asked to provide an essay are minimal to none. Although do double check individual colleges, they do have slightly different written work requirements. What we'll usually ask for is an example of your schoolwork that is particularly good. So 1 or 2 essays, usually no more than a couple of thousand words in length. Again, different colleges have slightly different limits of wordage, and there are usually teacher marked. So we can see what your teacher thought and the sort of improvement comments that the teacher has been giving you on there. What we want to see are some skills about, can you structure an argument and an essay? Are you able to write in a convincing manner? Are you able to bring in your ideas and your opinions with good reasoning? Are you able to bring in the ideas of other people that you're studying and examining as part of this as well? Are you able to be a critical thinker? Those sort of things, all expecting just what you're doing within your schoolwork. And we look at this within the context that it's written as well. Some people might submit something that's been drafted a couple of times. Some people might submit an exam essay that they did in 20 minutes. So we're looking at it, in relation to how it was written as well, in terms of how we assess it. So, it would be unfair to put somebody's 20-minute exam essay against a 3 times drafted essay that had been done over 6 hours. We're looking at it in that sort of relevant way. Please note, I would generally advise not submitting part of an EPQ. We certainly can't read the whole thing. We just wouldn't have the time to be able to read and go through all those in time. But I think that it's better to have something that is a self-contained piece of work rather than an extract from something larger, so we can see the whole of the thing we're looking at.
Thank you. And there's quite a few questions about choosing a college. How did you choose? And also, why would you choose Homerton? So for Clara and Nuha. Whoever wants to answer that one. Clara, go ahead.
Yeah, choosing a college, I would really recommend visiting a college in person if you're able to. I didn't. In fact, I don't necessarily regret not doing that because I was like, oh, if I go, I might get attached, and then if I don't get in, I'll feel really sad. But please do not have the sort of mentality and mindset that I had. If you are able to go, I would really recommend that you do, because even if you do end up going to the university or that specific college, you at least have a new experience, which for all you know, that might help shape your future applications for things that you go for in the future. But when it comes to deciding on colleges, I think some key things to think about are the distance to your course or your faculty, which if you Google on your course's faculty website, they will tell you more about the proximity of that, and you can find the distance between that and the location of your college, because obviously, say it's raining, you might not want to trek a super far distance. For me, I picked Homerton because it is right next to the education faculty, which is lovely. And also because from what I read on the website, I really liked what Homerton's community culture was like. So Homerton has this unique program called Homerton Changemakers, and it's super centered in around like social impact projects, and that's definitely aligns with like my areas of interest. And I saw that this was something emphasized a lot with Homerton's history as well, part of the history why it actually became a Cambridge college and is the youngest Cambridge college. So I felt like that was something that really appealed to me. So those are the 2 big reasons why I picked Homerton, and I'm very thankful that I did. And I'll let Nuha share hers.
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of my reasons are also quite similar. And I definitely would think about distance, I think is definitely a big one from anything that you're thinking of like using, any facilities that you're going to go to, so including the sports centre. And whether you want to cycle or not, because a lot of people do cycle in Cambridge, and like I personally came from a city where like no one cycles, so it's quite nice to actually have the opportunity to cycle. And people from like central colleges tend to just not. But I think it's quite nice. It's a very like Cambridge thing as well to be able to cycle. I'd also think about the facilities that the college has. I think Homerton, being one of the bigger colleges, has like better facilities than a lot of them. We have quite a nice gym and also a dance studio for if you do any sports. So that's like other things to consider. But I personally applied to Homerton because I knew that they had a lot of ensuite accommodation, and that was something that was quite important to me. And on top of that, I applied to Homerton because it's really close to Addenbrooke's Hospital, which is where you do your placement in your clinical years. I think it's literally like a 5-minute walk away, like a very short cycle. So it was one of the best colleges for that.
Thank you. There's a question about how interviews are scored. Is there formal scoring, or do interviewers simply gain a feel for the applicants? And are all 4 interviewers weighted equally? Maybe Paul or Sandy?
Yeah, so we judge a number of things during the interviews. We make some notes about how you performed on different questions, and we do come to a kind of a view in terms of how you compared to other students, and it's generally sort of along the lines of possibly or probably or strongly worth an offer. And the key thing to remember is that as part of this process, after we've done all of our interviews, the director of studies and the interviewers get together and discuss each student individually. So we put together all of our different assessments, and it may be that you've done fantastically in one question and not so well in another. And we feed that into the holistic process. So we look at your interview scores alongside all the other parts of your application to come to a decision. So even if you have a bad day in one interview, it's still possible that you can get a place. If you have a fantastic time in interviews, it may offset some lower performance in maybe the admissions assessments. So all these things balance. We look at all of these things as a whole. A lot of students are asking, what's more important? But I can honestly say that we make decisions based on each individual student's composite application, which can include interviews. We look at everything together, all of the contextual information, all of someone asked about the reference. We look at your personal statement. We look at your performance to date in exams. We look at your admissions assessments, and we look at the interviews. We have so much information to the extent that it takes Sandy and I probably, and Lindsay as well, is a key part of this. It takes us something like 4 months to go from start to finish in the admissions process. So we look at everything. Yeah, sorry.
And I think it's really important with this is that we're talking about each applicant individually in detail. We're looking at comments from the interviews. The scores are merely sort of a starting point for discussion. We know that some people, might mark things slightly differently. We're looking, some people might give slightly higher scores on average than other interviewers, and we as admissions tutors balance that out. The scores on their own don't really matter. This is not an algorithm. This is not an equation that is making the decision. It's human people looking at those scores, but more importantly, the comments, the views of the interviewers alongside everything else, and looking at it all in the context of the applicant as well. So it's a complicated process. Heck, it's what keeps Paul and I in a job and keeps a roof over our heads. It also means it's a human process. You're not just being looked at as data on a spreadsheet. What I'm saying, though, is that does make it a little bit complicated to explain sometimes, and that's the other side of the difficulty with this. Is the advantage is it's really personal. You can be assured you're going to be looked at really closely, really fairly, really personally in terms of that. But it does make it a little bit hard to explain.
And
there are things.
No, but there are, the way I look at it is there are loads of opportunities to shine, and doing poorly in one element of the application doesn't necessarily mean your application is sort of not going to get through. A lot of people are worried about the admissions assessments. We try to interview as many people as we can. If you're performing above average, there's a very good chance you'll be invited to interview. And it does depend on
if you're being interviewed. If you're being interviewed, that means that you're someone who we think has got a realistic shot of getting a place.
Yep.
We wouldn't interview you otherwise, and part of the assessments is to assess that.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you. We only have time to take a few more questions. There's a lot of questions that are really specific to particular subjects. I would recommend, in that case, emailing them to us. I'll put in the chat the email to send them to.
While Lindsay's doing that, do check the websites for the individual faculties and departments. A number of these questions, the answers to those are very much public knowledge in terms of course content, in terms of what they're looking for on there. So do double check. Each faculty has its own website. And of course, you've got the undergraduate study website as well for general questions about what qualifications we accept and things like that.
Thank you.
I hope I padded for time for you there, Lindsay.
Thanks. So I've put that in the chat, bearing in mind that the people who look at that inbox will be extremely busy at the moment. So you won't get an answer too quickly, but you will get an answer. We'll do maybe
this week with A-level results, please don't expect responses.
We'll do a few more questions, some really general ones, and in particular, like Sandy said, some of the ones that aren't as obvious to find online. How much importance is placed on GCSE scores?
We look at them as an indicator of how well you have been doing historically, but we also know that they're a little bit out of date. I used to be a secondary school teacher, and I know plenty of students who have really kicked it into high gear at A-level because they've grown into the course more, that style of learning suits them better. They're a little point that we look at, but they're unlikely to be something that we are paying heavy mind to. And we will, of course, be looking at extenuating circumstances or anything else around them. Where they can be particularly useful is how have you performed in key subjects that might be relevant. If you're applying for physics, we don't care about your art grade. That could be a U for all we care. But we do care about your maths grade. And we want to see some good performance that suggests that you might be on for that A or A star in mathematics that you're going to need to do well on the course. So you don't need to be a polymath. You don't need to have done brilliantly. We want to see that you're on an upward trend and able to get towards the grades that we're looking for on our course. And we're particularly looking at relevant subjects. But GCSEs would, on their own, rarely, if ever, be something that holds someone back from an interview or from the next stage of the process.
Thank you. I know some people are typing answers as well, so I'll let everyone finish that, and we will do another question that's very general.
I can do one here.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Someone's worrying about a very big corner case. How would you say character traits and likability sways an interview? The answer to that is not really, because different people are likable in different ways. You can be confident in different ways in your ideas. It could be, yelling out at the world that I'm right and here's why, or it could be quiet and considered. We're not looking at that. If someone the question saying if you had to choose between two identical academic and capable interviews, but one was just more likable, how would you choose between them? The answer is we wouldn't, because that's not what we should be deciding on a place for. We just make two offers if two people are equally good and maybe just a little bit different personality-wise. Don't worry about these little corner cases, folks. Just do
it's about what you say.
Prepare.
It's about what you say, not how you say it.
Exactly.
And that's really important.
We don't care what you look like. We don't care how you dress. We don't care whether we like you or not. And nor should we care about any of these things. I mean that in the nicest possible way. We do care about how you think, and are you going to be able to deal with the academic, toughness of our courses? Do you have the right style of thinking, the right resilience to be able to do well here at Cambridge?
Thank you. So I think we will end on that. Clara or Nuha or Sandy or Paul, did you want to give any final words of advice before we end this webinar? No pressure.
I'll just say, hopefully it's been helpful. And you can contact us if you have any questions about applying. We'd love it if you consider applying to Cambridge or to us. I think the key thing is to remember, if you don't apply, you can't get a place. And we know it's a tough competition. We know we ask for a lot in the application process, but hopefully it will be fun and it will be an experience. And even if you don't get a place, it shows by applying, you're showing that you are in one of the top fractions of performers in their qualifications in the country. So give it some thought, and we're always here to help if you need any support.
I would say put your effort into the things that you can control. Prepare well for the assessments, prepare well for the interviews, and I'm going to steal Paul's point from earlier. Listen. Do your research, find out the things that you need to find out, and listen to the things that you're reading on the website. Listen to your interviewers and answer what they're asking for. A student does not thrive at Cambridge if they don't listen.
Thank you. And Clara?
Yeah, just to add, there's been quite a few. Should I still apply? If I would definitely recommend all of you apply. You've obviously shown great initiative just by joining today. You have 5 options if you're applying from the UK. So I do think it's definitely worth aiming high. Along the process, just make sure you treat yourself with kindness, because getting into Cambridge most definitely isn't the be all or end all. And I think definitely give it a go. Try your hardest. Ask for feedback when it comes to writing your personal statement, and try not to worry too much, because you already are someone with great initiative. So you're going to be great in the future, whether you get into Cambridge or not.
Thank you. And Nuha?
Yeah, my best advice is similar to everyone else's. If you don't do as well as you would like on one specific part of the application, don't let that put you off applying. I did worse than I wanted to on my admissions exam, and I stressed about that so much. Even after the interview and the night before results day, it was all I could think about. And I just felt really silly after when I got the offer, and I was like, like it didn't mean as much as I thought it did, and I stressed so much over one thing when everything else went fine. So like just believe in yourselves. And also just because a lot of people have been asking about work experience, don't worry so much about what you're doing for work experience. Think about how you can reflect on it and like how you can link it to medicine in any way. It's not about who saw the coolest surgery, it's about who can talk about what you did. And you can literally make the most like minor encounter into something good if you reflect on it well in your personal statement.
Thank you so much. Sorry if you can hear the ambulance in the background. Um, thank you so
Li-
much for those. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, Lindsay, on that note, I was just going to say something else. Clara and Nuha mentioned earlier that we're the closest to education and medicine and the hospital as
That's
well,
true.
which is probably why you can hear the ambulance in the background. It just made me think. It's also worth noting that, we have a lot of places in other subjects, and we are slightly further out from the centre of town, but it is just a 10-15 minute cycle to get there across fields of cows in many cases. And it's a beautiful place. We're also near to a sports centre. We're near to the kind of leisure park, near to the train station. I just had to mention that at the end, in case you are thinking of applying for other subjects apart from medicine and education. So
Yeah,
we got lots of other subjects that we take as well.
thank you. Yeah, we do offer every subject that Cambridge offers here at Homerton, but not every college does offer every subject, so check
Mm.
that. And do apply to Homerton if you if you want to, obviously. We definitely want you to. Um, okay, on that note, we're going to end this webinar. If your questions weren't answered, sorry about that. We were limited with time. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you found this helpful, and goodbye.
Everyone wave. Thank you all.